Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Thank you for joining us tonight for the next Find Your Fit session. Tonight, I'm excited to have a guest speaker with me. I actually get to not have to talk as much tonight, so this is kind of fun for me. I am Mary Pat O'Neill. I created the Find Your Fit program for the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. I'm an independent college counselor over in Redmond, and I'm excited to be joined tonight by Cynthia Seidel, who is my friend and colleague. She's with On-Course College Counseling. Any of you who've been watching a number of Find Your Fit presentations over the years, a few years ago, I think it was 2021 in May, Cynthia. Anyways, we did one on international universities, which did include Canada, but we talked about other countries too. But tonight we're just going to focus on Canadian universities. Cynthia is my go-to person. She's very knowledgeable in this area, whereas I primarily work with students who are applying to US schools. So just a little bit about the format tonight. The slides will be sent afterwards with the recording. This is being recorded. There is a poll on the bottom here. If you'd like to participate, we'd love to see whether or not we're mostly talking to US citizens, Canadian citizens, what grade your student is in, and we will take questions at the end. So Cynthia, anything you want to say before we get started?
No, I think that's it, unless the poll results are in and we have a good answer.
No, that would require me to look, and I'll try to look. I will look before we hang up, and I'll tell you if I see anything. So,
okay.
But I am in charge of the slides tonight, and so if I'm not moving fast enough, Cynthia, please just say Mary Pat, next slide. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Awesome.
Anyway, okay.
Thanks, Mary Pat. Okay, so why consider a Canadian university? There are definite pros and cons. So we're going to talk about quite a few of those. And so my background is I am born and raised in Canada. I've been in the US since the 90s. And then we did the reverse. We raised 3 daughters in the US, and now they're all going to university in Canada. So, and I also have a lot of students that I work with every year, American and Canadian, who apply to Canadian universities for a lot of reasons. So, to get into the reasons. So one of the main reasons people do seek out Canadian universities, not just from Canada to the US, but around the world, is that they are world renowned. So a lot of the universities, UBC is, of course, the closest one, University of Toronto, McGill, Waterloo, they're world class. A lot of people also are seeking international experience, trying to get a little bit more life experience, try a different place. And all of the cool experiences that come with that. So that's another reason people do consider Canada. But I also very often hear it's for lifestyle reasons, for safety, diversity, very diverse student bodies in just about every way at most Canadian universities. And then the students tell me they love the single rooms. So most Canadian universities have, in the majority, single dorm rooms. So it's not that common to share a room in college in Canada. And that's for a lot of students, I hear that that's a really big draw. Another big reason is experiential opportunities, in particular co-op opportunities. It's not as big a thing in the US, but in Canada, it's very common to have co-op available at universities. And you have to apply and you still have to find your co-op work terms. But generally, they are well-paid positions that are directly related to what you're studying in your career, in your major. You're well-paid, as I think I mentioned. And when you go back into the classroom after a co-op period of time, most of your peers have also been on a co-op term. So suddenly everybody's back in the classroom with real-world applicable experience. And you're not just learning theoretical things anymore, which really elevates the level of learning and preparedness for careers. Obviously, another reason Canada is known for its universal healthcare. It's very inexpensive for international students. Canadians, it's free. So once you establish residency in Canada, usually it's within 3 months, you qualify for free provincial healthcare. In terms of working, you are able to work if you're on a student visa studying in Canada. So it's a different number of hours per week if you're working during the school year versus during breaks. So full-time during breaks. And you can stay in Canada for 3 years post-graduation, which can be enough time to get set up and apply for citizenship if that's something that a graduating student is interested in. So the price that we have there, cost of attendance ranges because even at one university, it'll range because it's usually based on the number of credits you take, not the same price for every undergraduate as in the US. So if you think about US cost of attendance, so room and board, books, supplies, etc., and tuition, it's going to be roughly between 30,000 a year all the way up into the low 80s per year. So it can be a really good bargain to look at Canadian universities.
Cynthia, question for you. I know you'll talk a little bit more about this, but because it's based on credit, are certain programs more expensive than others?
Yeah, great question. So the programs that have more course requirements, so engineering, architecture, business, they do tend to be a little bit more. They're not twice as much, they're a little bit more, depending on if you're taking two additional classes a year.
Okay, so it's not like a harder level math class is more expensive than like an English class. Not that there's anything wrong with math or English.
It depends.
Okay, all right.
So
That's always
there
that's
can be
always the
additional,
answer.
yeah, and it's like everything in colleges, right? There's always a qualifying, it depends. So
And
there can be
and then the 35 to 50,000, is that US dollars or Canadian dollars? Because there is
that's US at
okay.
the current exchange rate. So
Okay.
it also will fluctuate with exchange rates. So now is a really good time to go to Canada for school. Hopefully it will be again for the next few years.
Okay, cool. Oh, all right. As everybody knows, when I do Zoom, I thought maybe we had not had this happen, but I always, there we go. Okay. So
Perfect. Okay. So similarities.
Okay. So make sure I hadn't missed the cons yet. Okay. Similarities to the US schools.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So most of these things are pretty much the same. There's not that much difference in a lot of ways between Canadian and US colleges. They're both four-year degrees, big range in admission selectivity across various universities and programs. Campuses, you can get anything from a massive 60,000 student university campus to one with less than 2,000 students. They can be urban, rural, French speaking if you want. There's lots of options. So other than that, though, what was I going to say? Yeah, variety of campuses. I was going to mention that there are also liberal arts campuses in Canada. Even some Canadians aren't that aware of that. So in the US, a liberal arts campus is usually kind of typically a bit smaller and focused on a broad education. And in Canada, there are several of these. If anybody is interested in those, you can always just shoot me an email later and I can tell you a little bit more about those. But there are some that are within other universities, like large public universities, and there are some that are standalone, smaller liberal arts colleges. Most of them are not in British Columbia, though. So for all the Seattle folks, they're a little harder to get to. So degrees are accredited and fully recognized in the US, and the opposite is also true. US degrees are fully recognized in Canada. So I've worked with transfer students who have had a year or two in the US and decide they want to go to Canada. It should never be an issue. They're recognized as long as it's a fully accredited university in the United States. And the same for graduate school. Going into Canada to apply for a master's program or something is also recognized. There's, of course, academic and student support, tutoring services, all those things. Most universities in Canada do have dorms, although they can be different. Again, going to the single room, meal plans. The length of the school year is about the same, but it's pretty typical in Canada to start university right after Labor Day in September and end by the end of April. And there's a good reason for this. A lot of the Canadian schools have co-op programs, so that leaves an actual 4-month summer break to get a 4-month work period in there. And as well as having a summer academic term at a lot of the universities for students who want that. And then the last point you see there is the academic credit for AP, IB, and Running Start. So like most US universities, they also consider those for credit at Canadian universities.
Okay, before we go to the next slide, I am very sorry because I talked about the poll and Cynthia saw me do the poll, but there must have been a step I forgot because nobody can see them. I can see the poll. So there's no poll, everybody. I will figure this out by the next time.
That's okay.
I'll watch some tutorial on how to do polls. My apologies.
So we're going to assume that we have a nice mix of people who have Canadian
Yes.
citizenship and do not have Canadian
And the
citizenship.
silly Zoom thing, I swear. Gosh, I don't know why my noise does this. Okay. All right. How are they different?
So you can go, yeah, there you go. So some really big differences that can make or break whether it's a good idea for kids to consider. There is much less emphasis on big time sports or Greek life. They exist at a lot of universities, but not all. And it's a really different feel. Like it's not the focus of the university ever, either big time sports or Greek life. So there tends to be more focus on career readiness and practical preparation for entering the workforce, whether that's doing research, internships, study abroad, other activities or co-op that you would do. But there's a lot of emphasis on that. One of the biggest differences is that just about every university in Canada is public, which is great news if you're a Canadian citizen, because it is heavily subsidized by the Canadian government for Canadian citizens, which means a lot of the universities in Canada, if you've never lived in Canada, but you have Canadian citizenship, in US dollars, you'd be paying usually under about $5,000 a year tuition.
That is so amazing.
Yeah, so if you're American, pretend you didn't hear that. It's still a good deal.
How hard is it to become a Canadian citizen, Cynthia?
Well, if you graduate from a Canadian university,
Yeah.
you have a very realistic path to Canadian citizenship.
So maybe
Won't
for
help
the
you
kids
pay
then,
your,
yeah.
but after the fact. So the other thing is universities in Canada are much more transparent about their admissions requirements and cutoffs. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a bit, but they have, in most cases, very specific requirements, and they don't usually look at the entire cumulative GPA throughout high school. More typically, they're going to be looking at 6 classes from senior year. So that's either 11th or 12th grade, depending on the class, and I'll get into that a little bit more later too.
Okay.
So other differences, Canadian universities are much, much, much more diverse in every way. They typically have a lot of international students. So UBC, for example, has about a third of their student population international, like literally coming in from other countries to study there. But it's even within the culture of the Canadian students, there are a lot of internationally born Canadians and first generation Canadians. First generation in Canada, meaning parents were born in another country.
Right. Okay.
So tuition, we talked about, and another thing that I'll talk about that in a few minutes, about applying mostly to a program, not a specific major. It's not unusual to apply to sciences or arts and then narrow it down over time. And
can you go in undeclared?
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on the school.
Depends on the major.
Okay.
So most majors you can declare later. In fact, it's encouraged, but there are some that are only direct entry.
Okay.
On the university and how competitive it is.
Okay.
Also, things like architecture, where you need to hit the ground running taking architecture classes. There is no later path to apply to that just because of that.
Are there other majors that you can think of off the top of your head that are more direct admit?
Some business programs, it really depends.
Okay. Does it depend on the university?
The major.
Or okay. So like, is it you said certain business majors?
And
would that be universal at all Canadian universities, or is it depending on the university?
So it depends. And I just contradicted myself, I realized too. Even though in most cases you can narrow it down later to get into a certain major, if you're applying into engineering, for example, there's another example where you probably want to apply directly into engineering. Otherwise, you could lose a lot of time, up to a whole year, because you just can't get those initial prerequisite classes.
The prerequisite classes, right.
Which everything else builds upon. So
it's
not so much the university saying, we're not going to consider you for later admission, as you just added a year to your entire time at university if you don't apply directly into it.
Gotcha.
That's more common. And then in terms of the application platforms, I have a slide later where I'll talk about that, but there is not one Canadian centralized common app, unfortunately. That would be way too easy.
Yeah, that would be. Okay. All right.
Okay, admissions considerations. So this is where I wanted to talk a little bit more about how you apply. So a good example would be UBC because it's huge. So this will be the most
And
due
very
date. Well,
popular in this area,
very
obviously.
popular, yeah. So if you apply to UBC, it's not at all unusual to apply to sciences. So you're not applying to biology or biochem or you name it. You would apply to engineering, but you wouldn't, that is an exception. But it's not unusual to apply to sciences. And then by the end of first year, you would narrow down your specialization. So you would either declare a specialization if it's not a very limited entry specialization. If it's a smaller one, and an example, I wrote down some notes, would be cognitive systems. So the cognitive systems program is one that is by application at the end of first year. And admission to that is generally based on GPA, and that's it. So you have to have met the required classes in first year and then have a high enough GPA to qualify compared to all the other applicants. And then you go along for another year, maybe 2 more years. And then by the end of second or third year, you either declare your major if you've met the requirements or apply into a major if the major itself is limited capacity. So within the specialization I mentioned, cognitive systems program, they have a couple of majors in the Bachelor of Science side and several in the arts side that you can choose from. So BS in cognition and brain, it's an interesting one, or BS in computational intelligence and design, for example. So it gets very, very specialized, but you don't come out of high school saying, yes, I am going to be a brain specialist. Which makes sense because
I was gonna say that's actually nice because you kind of know the area you're interested in, and then you get to explore it more. When are co-ops taken? Are they usually second year?
Yeah, usually second or third year. You generally need to have enough education under your belt so that you can contribute positively in your field when you're working for a company. So generally you would apply for those during your second year. And then many of the universities in Canada allow you to have multiple co-ops. So they're usually 4 months each, sometimes longer, and you can alternate. So you might be on a co-op work term in the fall term and go to school for the next winter term and then summer term. So it really depends. You can really structure that how you would like. So in terms of the high school course requirements, that's something I definitely did want to go into because I always get a ton of questions about that. Not every university is the same, like the University of Victoria on Vancouver Island looks at the entire cumulative GPA. But most of the universities in Canada will be targeting just 6 classes on which to base the majority of your admissions decision. So what they do is they take senior classes, which is kind of the key word that they're all going to use. A senior class can be an AP class, an IB class, running start, or dual enrollment if you're not in the Washington area, or an honors class in most cases. That's not quite as clear cut, but usually, or a regular high school class taken in 12th grade. So it gets a little bit convoluted because there are a lot of different ways to do it. But I'll just give you an example.
Well, so the AP class, does it have to have been in 12th grade or do they just consider that a senior class?
They consider that a senior class whenever you take it. Yep, same with IB or a dual enrollment. But as an example, so if you're applying to an engineering degree at the University of Calgary, so it's a general engineering first year, you do want to apply to that out of high school, but you narrow down your specialization within engineering over time. But to apply to the University of Calgary in engineering, what they're looking for is they're going to be looking at your grade in English. So that'll be either your 12th grade English class, or if you took IB English or AP English or a running start course. They're also going to look at your pre-calculus grade and your calculus grade. And if you have AP Calculus AB and AP Calculus BC, they'll probably look at those 2 grades, but they might not. They might look at your pre-calc plus AB because that's what they're going to have at the time you apply, because you won't have your senior grades by the time you're applying.
That's what I was going to ask you. So if they were to use a real senior, i.e. 12th grade, will they use quarter grades, or do they only want a semester grade? How does
So
that work?
most of the Canadian universities will want your mid-year grades in
Mhm.
grade 12. So you'll be sending that as soon as they're available in early
Mhm.
February, and then your application won't be considered complete in most cases until they receive that.
Okay.
And then they'll base admissions on that, and they are typically going to be contingent or conditional on finishing, so graduating, which presumably you will be
Right.
graduating, but sometimes they'll put a certain grade on that too.
Mhm.
Sometimes, not always.
Right.
And then so for example, Calgary Engineering, so we talked about English pre-calc calculus, they're also requiring chemistry and either physics or biology, plus one more academic senior level class. And that's what your admission is based on. So
Okay.
they don't care if you got a D in 9th grade. They don't care if you got a,
So you get to, when so it's nice that you're saying senior, because if I had heard senior year grades, I would have thought they just meant 12th year grades, but they're
Yeah.
just saying these specific ones. And if they're not specific where they say pre-calculus, calculus, and they say we want a, senior level, senior grade English, you can pick out of any of the ones that you've done, correct?
well, you don't really pick. They see your transcript. They pick.
Oh, they pick. Okay. So
They're
this is,
gonna
I
pick,
thought I got to
but
be selective.
they're not trying to find reasons to not admit is
Okay.
the thing to keep
Okay.
in mind. They're trying to find reasons to admit,
Okay.
because what they're looking for is this student capable of doing the work at the level that we expect them to be doing
Right.
it at? And they actually have a note, University of Calgary in particular for engineering, is that if you don't have calculus, if you only have up to pre-calculus, you may still be considered for admission, but they're probably going to be looking for a higher GPA from you than they might have otherwise. So they're looking for extenuating circumstances and understanding whether you are ready to do the work.
And I know you talk about this in the next one, because prior to COVID, they were looking at standardized test scores from US students, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But now it depends on the college, or does it depend on the major, or?
Right now, almost across the board, none of them are requiring test scores. So test optional. There are a few programs where, like engineering at the University of Toronto, it's not required, but it is highly
Recommended.
They would like to see your test scores.
Sure. That makes sense.
So it can make a big difference. But for the most part, it really is test optional.
Okay.
Yeah. And then some colleges in universities in Canada. So college in Canada is a community college. And
I
not
know.
reissuing. I just want to make that clear. So when I'm
Well, and I work with some Canadian families, and I tend to use the words interchangeably because that's what you do in the US, and they always tell me that they cringe.
Yep. Exactly.
A university, a college. So my apologies for that too.
So if either of us mix that up, please excuse us.
Yes.
All of you Canadians in the room. So some universities will look at your activities. Some will look for, very rarely a recommendation letter, but like UBC, for example, does.
UBC does.
UBC does, but they don't want a letter. They just want the contact information.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they really use it a whole lot, but they do have that option of using that in contact.
Okay.
And then some have a lot of essays and some have none. Right. It really depends, and it depends on the major, because University of Victoria, for example, if you're applying to their business school, there are essays, plural, but none of the other majors have essays.
Interesting.
Or almost none of the other majors. Okay, so demonstrated interest.
And is this all pretty easily found on each university's website?
Not necessarily.
I know, and that's why they confuse me so much. It's not easy to find this information.
No, and it's usually buried in the applications. So you want to start those applications early so that if suddenly you are looking at 3 essays to write, it's not the last day and you're just about ready to submit. So give yourself time. Demonstrated interest, though, you do not have to worry about at all. They don't care if you've shown a ton of interest.
Can you go on normal, like you would here in the US, to go on a tour? Do you schedule them? Can you do all that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The same way?
Yep. Just go to the website, usually click visit, and you'll be able to sign up for a tour.
Great.
So nationality is not a factor in admissions in Canada. If you're qualified, they want you, basically. Like they don't want you if you're not qualified. It's
Yeah.
a meritocracy. So that's the other, we'll get to that more later too, but that's why if you Google the admit rate for UBC or Toronto or McGill, it's going to be a really high rate.
Yes, we talked about. I told Cynthia. I said, Cynthia, you need to explain this because it looks like every school has a 50% acceptance rate, and I don't think that's the case.
Not the case, no, because applicants in Canada and around the world, they self-select because it's pretty transparent what cutoffs they're looking for and what requirements. And if they're looking for a certain average and you know that it's impossible to get that with the courses that they're looking for, you haven't had the classes that they require, you're not going to apply because you know that it's not going to be a realistic outcome that you would be admitted.
So there's a service called, I hope I'm saying it right, McLean's. Am I saying it right? McLean's, yeah. And on there it does show kind of the range that they're looking for specific programs. Would that be accurate? Like it'll say science 94 and above, or things like that.
So the website for each college is going to be the very best source.
Okay.
And it'll be the most current as well.
Okay.
And even with that, with the caveat that last year's information is already out of date.
Okay.
Because you never know who your applicant pool is year to year. And those percentage cutoffs can change depending on the applicant pool.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's not usually going to drastically change, but it can change enough that it can make a difference. So timeline, the frustrating thing about applying to Canadian universities as an American or sitting in the US is that we know we have to get our answers to the US colleges by May 1st. Unfortunately, they're a little bit more relaxed about it in Canada. They don't let you know necessarily in time to decide by May 1st. So some of the really competitive universities, Waterloo comes to mind, world-class, especially for engineering and computer science, they actually have a pretty complex application for those, and essays are included. So it takes them a long time to review those applications. And it is not unusual that it may not be until the first or second week of May before you get a decision from Waterloo. And so what ends up happening is kids accept in the US, and if Waterloo is their first choice and they get accepted, they've lost their deposit, which is hopefully just $200 or something, which is not unusual in the US. It's just something you want to know going in, is that most Canadian universities you will hear on a rolling basis, so it could be really early. So a lot of them you would know before December. More often you hear around February because
so UBC isn't rolling though, right?
Yeah, UBC is rolling.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, so they make decisions based on the information you're able to provide. So if you have 6 senior level or AP classes that meet their requirements, they might admit you before seeing your mid-year senior grades. Okay. But they may not. It just depends.
I just haven't heard from any seniors this year about UBC, but you might have. So
no, none of my UBC kids this year have heard yet. I know there are answers that have been released, but here we don't get, it's not till early February that we get our mid-year grades. And then by the time they get sent to UBC and the application process. So usually kids around this area don't hear back until April.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sometimes March.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, how to apply. So this is our non-centralized application systems. Ontario does have a centralized application center, which is OUAC. And you just go on that site.
Do you want to name some of the universities that would fall under that, Cynthia?
Yeah. Let's go north
put you on the spot, sorry.
University of Ottawa, Carleton University.
Isn't Toronto in Ontario?
University of Toronto, Western University, Waterloo, Guelph, Laurier. Want me to keep going? Brock.
No, that's fine. I would just
Toronto Met.
I knew there were some big ones. I'm
from Ontario, so that was.
I'm from Detroit, and we used to go to Ontario, so it was right. The only place where Canada is south of the United States is in Detroit.
That's true. Okay, so Ontario is easy. Well, relatively easy. You apply to the centralized OUAC application, and they basically collect your demographic information, and you choose the programs you're applying to at each university, and then you wait, and those individual universities you applied to will then contact you. It can take a couple of weeks, and then they send you their supplemental.
Oh, okay.
So if there are essays involved, for example, or additional information they need, that's where you would submit that separately directly to them. So British Columbia came out 2 years ago with Education Planner BC, which is similar to OUAC, but a totally different platform. And you need to start your application to any British Columbia universities through Education Planner. And then the same thing, you'll have to actually know it's integrated into their system, unlike OUAC. So you would then fill out, say, the UBC section within that.
Okay.
Before submitting. There are, as of right now, 4 Canadian universities on the Common App. So not a huge proportion, but if you are interested in any of those 4, they're on the Common App. Otherwise, and for the other provinces, you would want to apply directly. So look at the university's website and they'll have instructions on how to apply directly to their university. It's usually pretty straightforward. Okay, scholarships. So the scholarships are usually less than in the US in overall, I would say, because they're not inflated in price. They're priced according to, well, I mean, it's not just according to cost, it's according to what the market will bear. But whereas merit scholarships are a much bigger component of how the pricing falls out in the US, it's not like that in Canada. So for Canadians, there are very few scholarships offered. And if they are, they're small because the whole price is small to start with.
The government has subsidized the cost.
Right. There's not much to work with.
Right.
They do award some merit scholarships to international students, but the colleges that do that, and whether it's automatic or whether there's an additional application, you would have to look on the individual websites and just see what those parameters are. There is, some universities provide need-based financial aid, and they're called bursaries in Canada. So you can apply for those. You would have to apply because there's no other way that they would know that it's need-based.
Is there a form similar to like the FAFSA or anything? Or?
No, that would be too easy once again.
Okay.
In a perfect world. No, but you can go to each individual university's website, usually after you've been admitted. So that once you've narrowed it, you don't have to apply to a whole bunch of universities for bursaries, but you would apply, and it's if the university determines that there is need-based financial reason for awarding it, you can apply. As an international student, it's a little bit different. So some of the universities in Canada will provide need-based aid to international students, like Simon Fraser in Burnaby. The University of Toronto, however, will not. Mm-hmm. So you want to just search for that on their websites and just see what they do. Okay. But the good news is you can use your education savings accounts from the US in Canada because they're all within the Title IV program. So they are recognized by the US Education Department. Okay.
So now we're going to go into some examples here.
Yes. So given that we are probably mostly sitting in Seattle area, or Redmond, probably. I've given 3 examples from British Columbia and one that's totally different in Quebec, just to kind of give you a feel for what's out there. So you've probably already heard of the University of Victoria. It is just a little clipper ride away on Vancouver Island, really pretty, right by the water, walking distance to downtown Victoria. The cost of attendance, depending on the major, but it's going to be about $36,000 US annually. So really good price.
But not if you're a Canadian, not if you're a dual citizen.
Oh, no, if you're a Canadian. So
yeah.
A little bit cheaper than that.
Yeah.
So the University of Victoria is really well known for environmental sciences. Anything environmental, they're phenomenal. Marine biology, you name it. They're also a really strong university for research and for collaboration internationally with other universities on research in any number of fields. Most of the majors do offer co-op, and that's not just local, it's all over Canada or really all over the world. And generally speaking, if you have connections to a job somewhere in your hometown or wherever it might be, you can work with the university to make that into a co-op placement, and they can just coordinate with the employer that's agreed to hire you, things like that. So there are lots of options. What I don't have on that slide, no, go back.
Oh, sorry. Yep, sorry.
Sorry, just the size. So for relative perspective, there are about 19,000 undergrads. I think the total number of students is 23,000. So it's a very undergraduate focused university. So the undergraduates are getting a ton of research and experiential opportunities, which is
And
pretty
relatively speaking, like when you look at UBC or something, that's fairly small, isn't it?
pretty small.
Yeah,
The next slide
like a
is
nice
small.
size, you know.
Yeah. So Emily Carr is tiny. It has less than 2,000 students. However, it ranks number 24 in the world for art and design.
Cool.
So it is a very top-notch university. They have, So out of their roughly 2,000 undergrads, 50 countries are represented.
Wow.
So they draw from all over the world. So they're looking for really strong artistic talent and potential, and they subsidize international students as well.
Nice.
So tuition, that number is accurate. It's about US 16,000 a year for tuition and fees. And you have to still pay. So the tricky part, room and board is not offered because it's a tiny school. There's tons of housing. It's right near Granville Island in Vancouver, but housing in Vancouver is really difficult to find. I should say affordable housing in Vancouver. But the good thing is with the exchange rate, affordable is relative. So I think if somebody were interested in going, was able to gain admission to Emily Carr, that would be probably a pretty minor detail.
Is there a certain kind of art that they're known for there, or is it pretty broad?
Pretty broad. So visual arts, they also have a really strong graduate school component. It's actually located just to the right of those buildings you see in the picture. It's a collaboration between UBC, SFU, and Emily Carr. So it's some pretty cool stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready for the next one?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so Simon Fraser, located on top of a mountain. And in fact, they got
Gorgeous.
8 inches of snow on Saturday night. I know, because 2 of my kids go there. So Simon Fraser is about the same size as the University of Victoria. They were both opened in the 60s. And Simon Fraser is kind of cool. It's a very undergraduate focused university, even though it has a lot of graduate school as well, or graduate students, about 25,000 undergrads. So a little bit bigger than UVic. But one of the cool things about Simon Fraser, really strong for co-op programs, but it's also really strong for having really specific majors. So you can go there and get, well, certainly a BA in film. They're a great film school. But a BA in criminology that's interdisciplinary and can be combined with all these other things that I've listed. Or a BA in labor relations. That's not something you see very often in the US. Certainly international studies, health sciences. They're very well known for health sciences with a lot of very, very targeted specializations that you can see listed there. They also have direct entry computer science, and it's driving distance from Seattle. So it's kind of nice to know that that is an option as well north of the border.
Is it as difficult to get into the direct entry computer science as it can be in the US?
Difficult is different, right? Because they're looking for different criteria.
Okay.
If you have a terrible 9th grade year, maybe even a terrible 10th grade year, and then suddenly in 11th grade, you pull all A's in these really rigorous classes, you probably have a really good shot at getting admitted.
Okay, good to know.
And they're not going to care if your parents attended this school, and they're not going to care if you have reference letters that are glowing. They're looking for, if you've shown that you have the academic ability, if you've done well in the classes that are related. So it's a very different approach to admitting students.
That's good to know.
So UBC, which probably everybody's heard of, not that dissimilar from UW, except it has a better view. One of my kids goes there too. So really large university, 60,000 students at the Vancouver campus, 12 at Okanagan, which is in Kelowna, about 5 hours east of Vancouver, 4 hours. Of that 60,000, about 45-ish are undergrads. So it's huge. It's a massive university. It's highly competitive, very competitive. So don't believe what you search online that 1 and 2 get in. Not quite the case. It's also ranked consistently around number 40 in the world for research universities. So of course, it's not going to be really easy to get into. It does tend to be quite competitive even once you're there. So you do need to go in knowing that if you get admitted to sciences and you really intend to major in brain science, it might not be easy to get to that. Because
Okay.
you've got a lot of other people who may also want to be majoring in brain science. So it's pretty competitive to get research opportunities, experiential things. But if you're a strong student and you are good at advocating for yourself and you're comfortable in a competitive situation, it can be an amazing experience and a really good university as far as opportunities.
I see that the cost is a little higher for UBC than the other ones. Does that have to do with Vancouver cost of living, or is it?
Well, a little, yeah, that's built in a little bit, but it's more market rates. So
Okay.
the universities of Toronto, McGill, and Waterloo are all in that range now.
Okay.
Yep, because they're also, costs are going up everywhere, and to be competitive, they need to.
Yeah, to have the facilities and research.
Yep.
And okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and actually, I was going to tell you, go back one more time to UBC.
Yep.
Cool facts. Oh, actually, I forgot to tell you a cool fact about Simon Fraser. It is the only Canadian university in the NCAA.
Oh.
And they're a D2 school.
For all sports, or?
Football, and I believe there's some more, but I couldn't easily get a list. It's not that big a deal in Canada.
Yeah.
Strangely. But UBC, another cool fact about UBC is going to be that it's one of the most filmed locations in the world. So you've probably seen their campus multiple times in films, TV shows that you've watched. The X-Files, a lot of the scenes were filmed there. Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb was filmed there, and several other ones, but a lot of them are restricted, so I won't mention them here.
Yeah. Well, that's fun. Right.
Okay, so this is the other one that's got nothing to do with British Columbia. This is a liberal arts university in Quebec. It's somewhat remote. It's in Sherbrooke, which is a small city. The picture that you see is just the campus. It's pretty close to Sherbrooke. So just under 3,000 students, all undergraduate, really well focused on, like most liberal arts schools, business, humanities, natural sciences. And the reason I chose Bishops, it's a really cool school. Consistently, years and years in, it's ranked 1 or 2 for student satisfaction. So it's a little harder to get to. Quebec is French speaking, but this is a fully English taught university. You don't really need to speak French, but it probably would help if you've had a few years and if you're interested in learning more to live there. So, okay. So that is pretty much the end of the presentation. For more information, a really good source for basic information and links to explore more is Universities Canada. So that website there with information on 98, which 98 universities is all the universities in Canada. So they're all there. And then the other best way to find information is using the university's websites directly and searching by course. So search either course or program. You can search by major. Some of them use that terminology, even for applying out of high school. And usually it'll give you a pretty good feel for what high school courses you're going to have to not only have taken, but be considered for admission based on.
So when you say GPA cutoffs, would it say student at a minimum 85% or whatever? Is that how it would say?
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
Or it'll publish last year's cutoffs so that you have a feel for what it historically has.
Okay. And again, knowing that that's past information and there's no guarantee that will be the same for the coming year. Okay.
Yeah. And not every university publishes them. UBC, it's really hard to find that information. Unfortunately, yeah. So some of them.
I know I've emailed admissions at UBC and it takes them about 3 weeks to respond. So they're not the most responsive. So
it depends. Sometimes results are really quick. It just depends.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, before we go into the questions, so Cynthia, would you like to do a little plug for yourself? You're so knowledgeable in this.
Thank you. It helps being Canadian. um, yeah, so I'm in Sammamish, so not that far from you guys. So I work with students applying to the US, Canada, international in general. I'd be happy to talk to you guys if you're interested in college planning for any, especially international universities. And that's my website. You can go there and get some more information there. And you can also contact me through there if you'd like.
Great. Okay, and then again, before we go into questions, we do have a few upcoming Find Your Fit events next Tuesday. And this one is geared more for freshmen and junior, or excuse me, freshman and sophomore. It's going to be an update on where we're at for standardized testing, and then also the new digital SAT, which is impacting the class of 25 and beyond. And I'll be joined by Maddie Steiner, who has joined me before, and he's always a very good speaker and very knowledgeable on the topic. And then if you know anybody who is a middle school parent and is worried about the transition to high school, I'm going to be doing a middle school presentation on Thursday, March 16th at 7 o'clock. These are all on Zoom. You can find them on the Lake Washington Schools Foundation website. Last thing is, I always am proud to be associated and to volunteer my time with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. It relies on donations. That's how, the only way that all these programs that they do happen. I'm a volunteer, so I guess I'm pretty cheap. There's a lot of others. There's pantry packs and Balance in Mind and Kids Coming Together and Links Crew, and oh, I know there's somebody I'm missing. But anyways, the annual luncheon is going to be on March 23rd in Redmond at the Marriott. It hasn't happened in person since 2019 because of COVID. I've always gone. They always have the same salad, but it's a good salad. And so I hope people will join. If you can't make it, please send in a donation to the foundation, because they do rely on donations, and it's a great organization. They do so much in our district. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to start looking at questions here. Okay, I will read to you because these are probably going to be questions that you answer. Okay. How familiar are Canadian universities with programs like Running Start? Is AP a better choice for high schoolers interested in Canadian universities? Poor Running Start. Everybody gets confused. They're always worried that Running Start's the ugly stepchild that nobody wants, but they do want Running Start.
So it depends. Yeah, so Mary Pat knows. So Waterloo actually contacted me a few months ago and said, okay, can you meet with our admissions team and tell us what the heck Running Start is? Because they kept running into it from all of our applicants from Washington. And they're like, they're really good candidates, but we don't know what to do with this. So don't assume the Canadian universities will know. Certainly the British Columbia universities, they know. And I would say most of them do, but occasionally you're going to run into a school that does not. So if you are applying to a Canadian university, I would say reach out to the admissions office, ask them, and be ready to provide a little bit more information. The other thing that I usually have my students do is to keep all of their syllabi from their Running Start classes.
That's a good idea.
And it can be very time consuming, but once you've chosen your university, so one of my daughters did Running Start and she's now at Simon Fraser. She started out at UBC and then transferred actually. She wanted a specific program at SFU, so that's where she is now. For both universities, she put together a spreadsheet of each class she took at Bellevue College with the course code description, a link to the syllabus, and then she matched that with the required classes in the program she was applying to at those two universities. And it was extremely smooth.
So just to refresh people, in the United States, when you're applying as a Running Start student, you still apply as a freshman. And then after you're accepted and you decide to choose that college, then your Running Start college transcript gets sent over, and so does it work the same way then with Canadian universities?
It does, but in both cases, she was more proactive and decided to forward that to the admissions offices. And amazingly, they looked at that before she was even admitted. And
So all of her credits transferred over
all
though.
of her credits transferred,
Okay.
yeah, usually towards her degree requirements, not just as electives. So absolutely, it shouldn't be an issue, but occasionally you'll run into a university that just hasn't processed enough Washington applicants from Running Start to have had enough of an applicant pool that it's routine.
Okay.
So
So here's
contact.
another question. How well do graduates of Canadian engineering and computer science programs do in the US jobs market? And how about top US graduate schools? I think you
I
answered
would
that,
say, I would say generally pretty well.
yeah.
So if you talk to hiring managers, say at Amazon and Microsoft, a lot of them recruit at Canadian universities.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they're internationally known. They're top
What
schools.
about for applying, let's say a student is going to apply to a US medical school? Are there any issues with the Canadian undergraduate degree? Do you know?
So, I mean, there shouldn't be. You should be, well, one of the things, yeah, it depends. So applying to medical school, you want to have a very strong GPA,
Right,
no
right,
matter where you went. So you could go to
right.
school internationally for an undergrad, and if you're a US citizen and applying, or even not applying to US medical schools, but one of the most important criteria is having a strong GPA. And like if you went to a lot of the public universities in the US, the Canadian universities are not known for grade inflation.
Right.
So in that way, you need to really be sure that you're a very strong student academically and that you're willing to put in the work during undergraduate to make sure that your GPA
Yeah.
stays very, very high.
Yeah.
Well, I will say one thing about medical school. If you are thinking about medical school in Canada, it really helps to be Canadian, and it also really helps to have your undergraduate completed or to be a resident of the province in which you want to attend medical school.
Okay. It's good to know.
So there are a lot of other factors if you're looking at medical school.
Okay. So somebody asked, does AP English Lang, so AP Lang count as a senior? They use the term 12th grade course, and what we learned tonight, senior course and 12th grade course are not one and the same. It's just the higher level courses. So the answer is yes, right?
Yep.
It would count as a senior grade, not 12th grade course, but the senior
Yep.
grade. I always learn, see, by the time I don't use college and university anymore, I watch my words and stuff. It says engineering at the University of Toronto seems to be looking also for SAT subject tests, which aren't available anymore.
Yeah, they so need to get that off their website. Every time they do a presentation, we bring that up. And they've said that there are still a few students in 12th grade that have had SAT subject tests because they got rid of them during the pandemic. It must have been 2020.
Yeah, 2019 is when I think they ended them.
Yeah, I think so too.
The College Board did.
Yeah, so there are still a few kids out there who have had them. So as long as there are still a few applicants who have them, they're not taking it off their website. But no, you don't worry about that for a second.
Okay. Somebody said last year McGill was the only school that asked for official SAT scores. I don't know if it's a question. I think it's a comment, but
McGill is still liking their SAT scores. I don't know if they've changed their policy for this year, to be honest. And it might depend on the major. And Toronto wants SATs if at all possible too for engineering.
Okay. So someone also asked, with UBC, at least for business school, my daughter had to do an interview as part of the application. And, and in the slides that Cynthia prepared, it did say that an interview could be possible. So it just depends on the school. It's just like the US, it totally depends on the school. I wish this was universal, that everybody did the same thing.
So, and actually the Canadian schools are getting more and more into using video or recorded interviews.
Oh, okay.
Applicant process.
UBC, you mean like where they just shoot you the question and you have 30 seconds to respond, that type of thing?
It can be. So it depends, different formats.
Okay. I remember when my son was applying to graduate school, he had some of the universities had that weird system. Okay. Sorry, my mouse isn't working very well here. Okay, I can answer this one. What does demonstrated interest mean for the US as a side note? So again, it depends on the college, and the college data is a great website that shows a scattergram of what a college considers in the admissions process. And one of the points is the term demonstrated interest, which can be done in a lot of different ways, but it's basically where a student has demonstrated through perhaps visiting in person, reaching out to the admissions office, attending a college fair. If they go to if the university shows up at their high school, they go and they talk to them. But it's some sort of a demonstration that the student is actually interested. And when, again, not all schools do it, like University of Washington, they could care less how much you demonstrate interest. Stanford doesn't care, Berkeley doesn't care, but other schools do care. And in admissions, there is a number called yield, and the yield is the percentage of students who accept a college's offer of admission. And I used to do a math test with students at the first meeting. I'd say, if you apply to 8 schools, how many do you get to attend? And those poor kids, their eyes would all bug out. And I'd say, 1. You can only apply to 1, or you can only accept 1. But that one, whoever a student accepts, that adds to a college's yield. And there are, and Cynthia, feel free to jump in on here, but there are colleges where, because you hear these stories where they go, oh my God, my 4.0 student with a 1600 SAT did not get accepted to this school. But if a student didn't demonstrate any interest in the college or university cares about that, it's possible they go, this kid's they're never gonna come. So we're not gonna offer it to them because we don't want to ruin our yield. So that's what demonstrated interest is. Anything you want to add to that, Cynthia?
No, I agree 100%. And actually, I see one of the other questions coming up is the cost of applying to Canadian universities, which is higher. Keep in mind that's Canadian dollars, and it's usually not quite $200 to $250. Somebody asked or mentioned that they spent $200 to $250 per university in Canada to apply last year. It can get expensive because you'll pay especially in Ontario, it gets really expensive because you pay the standard application fee for the OUAC, and then you pay the individual fee, but you also pay a fee for each individual program you apply to. So if you're applying to Waterloo, you get up to 3 programs.
Oh, you can apply to multiple programs. Okay.
Yeah, they're gonna ding you with a fee for each one, so it can add up quickly. But the difference is Canadians don't apply to 20 colleges.
Right.
Because you know where you're likely to get in. So you apply to the ones that you really want, where you stand a chance. So it's usually 2 or 3 or 4. So in the end, it probably is a wash with how much you would spend in the US. But the other thing is the demonstrated interest isn't a factor. So that's one less unknown that you don't have to worry about in Canada.
Right. Although I would still recommend touring and visiting schools as much as possible.
Yeah. Don't just randomly throw applications, especially at that price. You want to know what you're doing.
All right, let's see here. Are the more competitive universities like University of Toronto and Waterloo extremely stressful?
Yeah, they can be. And UBC.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And McGill. They can be very stressful. They're not easy. And I wouldn't necessarily say they're all weed out universities, but they're not admitting you with and then doing everything they possibly can to support you. They're going to admit you because they've seen and recognized that you're capable, but then it's up to you what you do with that opportunity. So that can cause a lot of stress. Same with UW, same with a lot of the big public universities in the US.
I'm having a hard time with my mouse for some reason.
No, do you want, I can get at the questions too.
Okay, because I've stopped on the cost per school application. I can't get it to scroll down for some reason.
So a good question here. Yes, Queens is also on the OUAC, the Ontario standard application. It's not just on the Common App. That's a good question. The next one is somebody says Simon Fraser is a commuter school. It is not at all. So Simon Fraser actually has more housing relative as a percentage of the student body than UBC. Interestingly. So in fact, they just built 2 brand new, beautiful residence halls and a brand new dining hall. My kids between them have had 3 years of living on campus. And so there's some really good options for living on campus. So quality of life for US students attending, but it's not a commuter university. It's definitely a residential university. And most students in Canada live on campus 1 year, 2 years. And then they
find to US and then they go find housing.
Yeah. So there are tons and tons of options. It's just a matter of how far you want to go and how much you're willing to pay. But honestly, it's about on par price wise with UW for finding off-campus housing.
Okay. It's okay. So I did, okay, so I can see the questions now. It says, are these rates international students, right? So these were, the rates that you showed were for international students, not Canadian citizens, the dual citizens, right? For the tuition cost?
Oh, they're for US citizens, yeah.
Right, yeah, international students, okay.
Yeah.
And then someone asked, can you please discuss McGill? I don't know what they want, but
What would you like to discuss about McGill?
I don't know. It just says, can you please discuss McGill?
Whoever wrote that, do you want to add some more detail?
Okay. It says, is Canada PR holders, I don't know what that means, are considered as Canadian for tuition, or are they
Yes.
considered? Okay, I don't even
Yeah.
know. What's a
permanent
PR holder?
permanent resident.
Oh,
It's the equivalent
resident.
of a
Okay.
green card in the US.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Does UBC require admission essays? They do.
They do.
Right?
They require 3 plus activities. Yeah.
Okay, somebody asked, if you don't want credit for AP classes, do you need to take the AP exams? I don't know if they're asking for US universities, or why don't you answer it for Canadian, I guess. I mean, I guess the question is, do they look at your scores in Canada for the AP exam?
They could. So typically they're going to be looking at the grade for admission purposes and then the scores for whether you're going to get credit for that.
Yeah.
If you can waive out of that class in university. So same as the US.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't know why you're taking AP classes necessarily. Well, I mean, like my daughter was a biology major, and she still took AP bio, and of course, while she got the credit, she still had to take biology 101 because she was a biology major, but it certainly prepared her, and it showed her strengths in biology. So I do like it. It's one of those things. There's not a black and white answer about AP scores, but as more schools maybe aren't looking at standardized test scores, the ACT, SAT, there are some schools who would really like to see AP scores. Wouldn't you agree, Cynthia?
Definitely. And usually it doesn't hurt anything to take the test. It costs a little bit, but it's usually, I mean, if you get a terrible score, you just don't submit it to the colleges. So there's usually not much to be lost and just giving it a try and seeing how you do. And then if you get a good score, you can waive out of a class, which is
yeah.
huge.
I mean, it depends on your program and all that,
Yeah.
but okay. So they asked, what about the Cambridge program at Juanita? Will Canadian universities recognize those courses? Yeah, they would. My kid is interested in arts and is doing WANIC at DigiPen. Is this something that can be used? So they must be doing that block WANIC class where the student's taking 4 classes at the high school and then 3 classes from WANIC, which is different than Running Start.
So it'll be on the school or the high school transcript. So yes.
Yes. Yeah.
As with US colleges, if it's on your high school transcript, it's going to be looked at as high school classes.
Okay, if I do Running Start without finishing my high school credits directly, will Canadian universities accept the district awarded high school diploma?
I think what you're saying is you're doing Running Start, which is the normal Running Start where it's dual enrollment. So you get college credit and high school credit. It sounds like your Running Start credits will be on your district awarded high school transcript.
Yeah, I didn't know if maybe they meant they continued at community college after finishing high school. And maybe then they're a transfer student, but I don't know.
Not clear on the question.
I'm not really clear on this one either. It says, do any colleges ask for the ACT? Canadian universities, if they would take a standardized test score, they're not going to, they don't only take the, they don't care, right? Just like in the US. Okay, that's what I thought. All right. someone asked, what is an 80 or 90 in US grade points? So an 80 would be a B, 90 would be an A, right, Cynthia?
Yeah, and so each university looks at it slightly differently. So you'll have to go to their website and get how they specifically look at that.
Okay. Because it says, do Canadian schools consider a 4.0 in an, oh, I think they're asking about weighted GPAs. Do they weight?
They don't weight. I
Okay.
mean, they're not, it's not the same system,
Okay.
not a clean, but you could look at the website for how they're going to interpret a 4.0 GPA in the States.
Would they interpret them differently?
They might, and each province has a slightly different rubric for how they're grading. And their grades are slightly different. So the University of Alberta might be different than Brock University, than UVic.
Okay, you might know this question, the answer to this question, since you have children. Can you get second year and beyond at Simon Fraser for on-campus housing?
We're in the process of trying to do that right now for one of mine. You have to apply really, really early, and it's a lottery. So by around February, they communicate the lottery results, and you could have a low number and then you're pretty likely to get it. Or if you have a very, very high number, you need to start looking for off-campus housing early so that you get
Okay,
it.
so you would know. Okay.
Yeah, and
someone just made a comment that the Simon Fraser dining hall is amazing and the food is better than Deb. Okay, so the person who asked about McGill they got back here. So we couldn't profile every university in Canada. We'd be here all night. And Cynthia was focusing on British Columbia because that's what a lot of families care about because it's nearby. Anyways, size, atmosphere, what it's like for a non-French speaking kiddo, anything else, that's what they're looking for. So if you have any background on that, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, so McGill is a large public university, very, very urban. It's kind of right in the heart of Montreal, and Montreal is French speaking. You don't have to speak French, but kind of like going to Bishop's, you would be a lot happier and more comfortable, most likely, if you did have a pretty good command of French as well as English. And one of the other messages lower, or one of the questions lower, is pointing out that Canadian residency is province specific. It's not exactly province specific. So the only exception is Quebec. Quebec is the French speaking province that if you are a Quebecois, you get a different tuition rate than if you are from elsewhere in Canada, and a different tuition rate from that versus if you are international. So the rest of the provinces are pretty much you're Canadian or you're international. Quebec is a little bit different, but on McGill's website, you can see the different tiers of what you would pay depending on whether you are Quebecois or coming out of another province or international. And McGill's got some really great qualities too. So that would be one that I would really strongly recommend visiting before you decide if you'd like to go there, just because it is in a French-speaking province, even though it is 100% English spoken and taught university. But, just want to kind of go and see your comfort level with being there.
Okay, so somebody was asking about AP scores being on the transcript. AP scores are not listed on a student's high school transcript. They are the grade for the AP course is on the transcript, but not on. I can't speak for Canadian college applications, but in the US applications, students have the option of self-reporting their AP scores. And and then when a student accepts an offer of admission from a university, and they would send their official AP scores from the College Board to that one university. That's how that works. So, okay, if you self-study an AP course and don't have grades, will this course be taken into account?
No.
Okay. Let's see. My daughter did not get into an AP history class, but it's a strong subject for her. So she is planning on taking the AP test, was not sure without taking the class if the test would be favorable to take. So I guess it's the same question, is if the class isn't on their transcript, then the university doesn't care about the score?
I mean, they'd probably, you could possibly waive a class in university based on your score, but it wouldn't, so they're looking for grades for admissions purposes.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
wouldn't help you.
In
with
that, in the
admission.
senior, for the senior courses that
Right.
you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, they don't care about the AP score for admission purposes. Is that what we're saying here?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you need 3 years of a foreign language to attend a Canadian university?
If you're applying for world languages, probably, or international relations, but for most, it's more, I would worry more about the high school graduation requirements in the US. So you would need 2 years. Most will not require 3 years of foreign language, but you can look at the specific requirements for the universities you're looking at and the major or programs you're applying to, because that's where it's going to be more relevant.
Okay. I'm not sure. My son is a Running Start student who is working toward his AA degree without worrying about fulfilling high school requirements. I don't know what that, I mean, you can't, part of Running Start is you have to fulfill your high school requirements. That's what Running Start's on. So I hope he is fulfilling his high school requirements. He'll finish 12th grade with an AA degree, and the district will award his diploma directly instead of through his school. Oh, maybe I don't know anything about that sort of a diploma. Will that be treated the same as a regular high school diploma? Sorry, we don't know the name of the program.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough information from that to really definitively say either way. Because if you haven't yet graduated high school, whether you're applying to a US or a Canadian university, you apply as a freshman, but you need you need to be graduating that year from high school. But if you have earned an AA degree, you typically also will have had to have graduated from high school, unless you've gotten an exception somehow, in which case you would apply as a transfer student. But it depends on, we don't really.
And I think this is where it's saying, and the district will award his diploma directly instead of through his high. And I don't have any experience with students doing that, so I'm sorry. I don't know the answer. That would be a question. I mean, just like with US universities, don't be afraid to ask questions to the admissions office. And then what is the average annual cost of UBC for Canadian citizens? Is it about 5,000, 6,000?
So Americans don't listen.
Right.
Tuition be under 5,000 US a year.
Okay.
And then plus room and board. So we've never paid 20,000 US a year all in. It's always been much less than that.
Let's see. I think we've answered these already. Okay, I think we answered all of that stuff. Okay, I think we answered all the questions. So anyways, we thank everybody for coming tonight. Cynthia, as always, it's a pleasure to have you. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I always learn a lot from these myself. So I hope everybody has a good night. This has been recorded. The recording will be sent out. The slides from the PowerPoint will be sent out. And again, thanks everybody and have a good night.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Mary Pat.
Sure. Bye, Cynthia.
Bye.